The wind tore through the trees like it had a message meant just for him. Rain fell in angry sheets, hammering against Ilias's shoulders as he forced his way through the dense marshland. His coat was soaked, his breath heavy in the damp air. But he didn't stop. He couldn't, not after what he'd heard. That sound, a cry, sharp and cracking through the storm like a wounded soul, had cut into him deeper than the cold ever could. It wasn't just noise, it was desperation. Lightning cracked overhead, lighting up the twisted trees and stagnant pools around him. For a split second, everything was clear, and then the darkness swallowed it again. Elias wiped the rain from his eyes, muscles tense. He had no plan, only a pull. Someone was out there, and they needed help. The swamp didn't like strangers, and Elias, he'd never stopped being one. His boots made sickening, slurping sounds as the mud tried to keep him. It was like wading through memory, every step dragging up something he'd buried, regrets, names, faces. He hadn't spoken to another person in months. That's how he liked it. Out here, no one asked questions. No one reminded him of what he'd done or who he used to be. But now, some unseen force was pulling him out of hiding. He hated it. And yet, he couldn't turn back. Then it changed. The storm didn't stop, but it hesitated. The wind pulled back like a breath being held. No insects, no frogs, no sounds but the distant, watery echo of thunder. Elias froze. His instincts kicked. An old soldier, reflexes from another life. Something was near. Something is not right. He scanned the trees, the puddles, the hanging moss that seemed to twitch with anticipation. The swamp wasn't just wet. I watched it, and it wasn't going to give up its secret easily. Then it came again, clearer this time. A long, piercing cry, choked and broken at the end. It wasn't a deer, not a bird. It was painful, living pain. Elias' chest tightened. He didn't want to feel it, didn't want to let it in. But that cry, it pulled at the buried parts of him. The part that remembered kneeling in the dirt beside fallen brothers. The part that couldn't save them. The part that still hadn't forgiven himself. And now that part whispered, "Don't let it die alone." He swore under his breath. His grip tightened around the rifle strapped to his back. Still, his feet moved. One step, then another. A splash, a pull, a groan from the earth beneath. He didn't know what he was walking into. But whatever it was, he was already in it. Somewhere deep in the wet green, something was holding on. Just barely, and Elias against every part of the man he'd tried to become was going to find it. Thick vines brushed his arms. The mud rose to his shins. Something slick slithered near his foot, and he froze, but only for a moment. It was like the swamp wanted him to give up, to turn around and pretend he hadn't heard. But he wasn't that man anymore. Or maybe, deep down, he'd never really been able to walk away. Branches clawed at his clothes. The water bit at his skin. But still he pushed on, every step forward a quiet act of defiance. And then, somewhere ahead in the mist, something moved. A flicker in the corner of his vision made Elias stop mid-step. There, just beyond the moss-draped cypress, something shifted. Not the wind, not water. Something alive. He crouched, squinting through the downpour. For a moment, the world blurred. Then lightning flashed again, and in that brief stutter of white light, he saw it dot movement, struggling, the outline of an animal half swallowed by the earth. His breath caught. The rain tried to pull his attention away, but his eyes stayed fixed. Whatever it was fighting to stay alive. He edged closer, boots suctioned by the muck with every step. There, wedged between roots, trapped in the mud, was a dog, a German shepherd. Her legs kicked weakly, more out of instinct than strength, flinging bits of water and debris around her. Her coat, once thick and golden, was drenched and stained black with swamp filth. Her chest heaved. Each breath sounded like it cost her more than she had left. Their eyes met, and in that instant something passed between them, something raw. Not fear, not even panic. It was a plea, silent, soul deep, and Elias felt it slam straight through his chest. His eyes dropped to the ground, and his stomach clenched. Serpents, not one, not two, half a dozen or more. Their scaled bodies slithered through the flooded roots, drawn by movement, by weakness. Elias could tell by their patterns. Copperheads, deadly. One curled a little too close to her neck. The dog tried to lift her head, but it dropped again with a whimper. They were closing in. Elias didn't have time. Not minutes, not even seconds. His hands moved automatically, swinging the rifle off his back and into a ready position. But he didn't aim. He couldn't. There were too many, and too close. A missed shot could set them off, strike her before he even got close. His breath trembled. His instincts told him to stay back, to wait, to find a safer angle. But instincts weren't always moral. And this wasn't just about survival, not anymore. It was about not letting another living thing die, afraid and alone. He should have turned away. Any sane man would have. But he looked again, right into her eyes, eyes clouded with pain, but still burning with the will to live. It took him back, a battlefield, sand, smoke, screams, his comrade Logan laying on the ground, bleeding out, and those same eyes locked with his, begging not to be left behind. Elias hadn't been able to save Logan, but maybe, just maybe, he could save her. Damn it, he growled through clenched teeth. With one final breath, he plunged forward. The mud sucked greedily at his legs, pulling with every step like it meant to bury him too. Water sloshed into his boots, cold as ice. Every branch clawed at his clothes, and still he kept going. The snakes hissed at his presence. One reared its head but didn't strike. Not yet. He got closer, closer. He could hear her breath, raspy, shallow, trembling. She didn't flinch. As he approached, she just watched, like she knew he was the only thing standing between her and the end. He reached down, hands trembling, and slid one arm beneath her belly, the other around her chest. Then movement, a flash of muscle, a whip-like strike, a copperhead launched toward him, jaws wide. But Elias was faster. He yanked the dog upward just as the snake's fangs missed his forearm by inches, sinking instead into the wet wood behind him. The dog yelped in shock but didn't bite, didn't fight. He held her close, cradling her against his chest, heart racing like it wanted out of his ribs. And still she didn't resist. Her weight pressed against him, limp, warm, shivering. No growl, no snap, just breath on his collarbone. Just the faintest twitch of an ear. It was trust, unspoken, immediate, and it shattered. Something in Elias he hadn't even realized was still whole. Easy now, he whispered, half to her, half to himself. He turned back the way he came, cradling her carefully, shielding her from the wind as best he could. Behind him, the swamp closed back in silent. Watchful. Ahead lay the unknown. But Elias walked forward with purpose now. because somewhere between those roots and that rain, he'd made a choice. He wasn't leaving her behind. Back at the cabin, the warmth of the fire clashed with the tension inside the room. Elias gently laid her on a bed of folded blankets near the wood stove, moving with the same kind of care he used when handling live explosives in war. The dog, still too weak to resist, lifted her head for only a moment before letting it fall again. Her chest rose in shallow, uneven breaths. That night, Elias didn't sleep. Each time the fire cracked, she growled a deep, trembling sound from deep in her chest. Not threatening, just afraid. He sat in his armchair, hands folded, eyes on her. He didn't speak, he didn't move. But when she looked up, she always found his eyes waiting for hers, not demanding, not pushing, just present. Somewhere before dawn, the growls faded. The fear didn't, but something else had begun to flicker in their place. The next morning, Elias placed a bowl of water and a tin plate with scrambled eggs on the floor, not close enough to spook her, not far enough to ignore. Then he sat on the porch, the door left ajar. She didn't eat right away. Hours passed. He didn't go back in. It wasn't kindness he was offering. Not exactly. It was freedom. The kind he never got in uniform. The kind she'd probably never tasted in her life. When he returned at sunset, the plate was empty. The water bowl to dot she was still curled near the fire, but her ears didn't perk at his approach. That was trust or maybe exhaustion. Either way, it was a beginning. 2 days passed, then 3. The wounds on her legs began to scab. Her eyes no longer scanned the room in a panic, and when Elias stepped outside, she followed 10 feet behind, never closer, like a ghost, like a protector. Shadow, he said once, quietly, watching her trail him through the tall grass. She looked up, ears twitching. The name stayed, and so did she. She didn't wag her tail, didn't lick his hand, but she walked where he walked, slept where he sat, and when the wind howled again, she didn't growl. She just stayed near him. It was while brushing her coat that he first noticed them, beneath the thick fur along her ribs. Her flank, near her ear, were scars, old, jagged, some deep enough to still tug at her skin. Elias didn't ask what caused them. He didn't need to. He recognized what pain looked like when it had overstayed its welcome. Shadow stiffened at his touch, but didn't pull away. Later that night, as he washed his face, he caught his own reflection in the mirror above the sink-eye's hollow, cheekbones still marked by a shrapnel scar, the old tremor in his hands. To creatures, both broken dot. To survivors, both quiet, and for the first time, he didn't feel so alone in the silence when a pot slipped from Elias's grip and clattered to the floor. Shadow bolted to the corner, trembling, ears pinned back. He didn't speak, didn't approach, just picked it up, placed it back, and knelt beside her but left space between them. "Not your fault," he whispered later, when she eased closer to his chair during supper. He reached down, slowly. She flinched, but didn't retreat. Every movement became careful, every word softer. He didn't need her to obey. He needed her to feel safe. It started around midnight, 3 nights in a row. Shadow would rise from her blanket near the fire, posture tense, teeth barely showing. She faced the door, the windows, the woods. Elias noticed it too. Footprints by the shed, a cigarette butt by the fence, lines still fresh. "Someone's been out there," he muttered one morning, rifle in hand. Shadow stood beside him like a sentinel. Whoever they were, they didn't come close enough to be seen. But Shadow knew, and Elias didn't doubt her instincts for a second. They were deep in the woods when it happened. Elias knelt by a wild herb patch, gathering stalks in silence. Shadow sniffed the perimeter, alert but calm. Then the bushes exploded with movement. A boar, massive, snorting, charging straight for Elias. He barely had time to turn. Shadow was faster. She darted in front of him, barking with fury, her body a blur of motion and courage. The boar collided with her side, sending her flying. Elias fired once, then again. The beast dropped. Silence returned. But Shadow didn't get up. He rushed to her side, hands shaking, eyes scanning for the wound. Blood, not much, but enough to turn the fur on her shoulder dark. "Stay with me," he whispered, pressing his palm over the cut. Shadow whimpered, pressing her head into his leg. She hadn't hesitated, not for a second. She'd taken the hit that was meant for him, and in that moment, Elias understood something terrifying. He couldn't lose her. Not now. Back at the cabin, he cleaned the wound with water and antiseptic, stitching carefully, talking to her in a low murmur. "It's all right," he whispered. "I've got you now." Shadow didn't growl, didn't flinch. She rested her head on his knee and stayed there, breath slow but steady, eyes half closed. Elias didn't move. For hours he sat in silence, one hand on her neck, the other resting on his leg, watching the firelight flicker on the walls. Two lives once torn, now mending dots side by side. It started as a distant reminiscent, forgettably until it grew louder, closer. Then came the low, throaty growl of tires on gravel. Elias froze, halfway through chopping wood. His hand tightened around the axe handle. That sound didn't belong here. He glanced toward the tree line. The cabin was hidden deep in the woods, miles from the nearest road. No one just stumbled across this place. Shadow stood on the porch, stiff as stone, her ears perked, nose twitching with dread. She didn't growl, she didn't bark. She just stared into the forest, like she already knew who had come. Elias didn't need more than a second to understand. Trouble had found them. Dusk hadn't even settled yet, but beams of white light cut through the trees, intentional, slow, and practiced. Men moved like wolves, circling their prey. Elias ducked behind a moss-covered stump, rifle in hand. He counted 3, no 4, all armed. Their boots didn't crunch like hikers. They stepped like predators. His heart thumped, not out of fear for himself, but for her. Shadow crouched beside him, hackles raised. Her body was low, every muscle tight. She didn't whimper, didn't tremble. She remembered them. Elias whispered, "Stay with me, girl." But he knew she wouldn't stay hidden if they got close. Neither would he. A voice rang out through the dark. "Come out, sweetheart. You're not gonna run this time." The words were calm, like a man talking to a pet, but Shadow's body trembled not in fear, but in rage. A deep growl rumbled from her chest. Elias looked at her and saw its recognition. The way her ears flattened, the way her tail tucked, but her front paws dug into the dirt. She knew that voice. She hated that voice. And Elias knew, without a doubt, that these men weren't just hunters. They were her captors, her abusers, and they had come to reclaim what they thought they owned. The vet had scanned her when she was injured weeks ago. The chip was registered to a name that made Elias's gut twist, a defunct kennel, linked to illegal fighting, dogfighting. She hadn't just been abandoned. She had escaped barely. He remembered the scars now with sharper clarity, the way she flinched at ropes, the mistrust of doors. It all made sense. And these men, these smug, methodical trespassers, weren't looking for a lost pet. They were hunting. A survivor. Elias looked down at her, then back at the trees. No, he whispered to the night. Not again. That night, Elias didn't sleep. He worked in silence, moving through the trees like a ghost. The years had softened him, but the instincts remained sharp, buried under routine. He rigged a tripwire with a fishing line and broken glass near the north path, reinforced the front door, loaded the rifle, set a bear trap under leaves near the woodpile. He whispered to Shadow, "We're not the prey. Not this time." She sat beside him, unmoving. If they wanted her back, they'd have to walk through hell, and Elias was ready to guide them in. It began just past midnight. A twig cracked. Then a yelp. One of the men had triggered the tripwire. A scream followed, then a gunshot into the dark. Elias crouched by the front porch, heart hammering in his ears. From the trees, chaos erupted, shouting, crashing, lights flailing. They hadn't expected resistance, and they sure as hell hadn't expected Elias. He fired once into the air. "Just a warning, leave," he bellowed, "or the next one's not in the sky." Silence, then boots. Closer. They weren't backing down. The back door creaked. Elias turned, too late. One of them had circled around. He came in fast, raising his rifle butt before he could fire. A blur shot from the shadows. Shadow, she launched. Herself at the man, teeth bared, fury unleashed. They hit the floor hard, but the shot rang out. A single, deafening crack. Elias shouted, his chest tightening as he sprinted forward. The man was down, his weapon tossed aside. But Shadow lay limp on the wooden floor, her side slick with blood. No, 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 no. Elias didn't hesitate. He disarmed the man in one brutal move, driving the butt of his rifle into his jaw. Another tried to enter through the window. Elias shot just above his head. "Next one's not a warning," he snarled. The cowards ran. Leaves rustled. Tires screamed in the distance. And just like that, it was over. Accepted WASN single quotes. Because Shadow hadn't moved. He dropped to his knees, scooping her into his arms. "Stay with me, girl, please." Her breathing was shallow. Her eyes fluttered. "Got you," he whispered, voice cracking. "You're safe now." She licked his hand, barely weak. But it was there, and that was enough. He held her tighter, pressing his forehead to hers. "You're not going back," he said, tears streaking through the dirt on his face. "Not ever." They reached the clinic in the dead of night. Elias had driven like a man possessed, one hand on the wheel, the other never leaving Shadow's side. She whimpered once, then fell silent, her breaths shallow and scattered. The vet, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and tired hands, took her without a word. Elias didn't ask questions. He just followed, sat down in the corner of the sterile room, and didn't move. They cleaned the wound, stitched it, monitored her vitals. But Elias didn't watch the machines. He watched her. Hour after hour, he sat in that hard plastic chair, her leash looped around his wrist, as if he feared that even unconscious she might leave him. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. He barely blinked. He had lost too much in this life, and he wasn't ready to lose her to Dot. 3 days passed. Shadow didn't wake. Machines beeped quietly beside her, and each one was a tether Elias clung to. Then, on the morning of the 4th day, as the sun peeked through the frost-covered window, Elias leaned close and whispered, You made it through worse, girl, I know. You did. Her ear twitched. Then, slowly, weakly, her tail tapped the edge of the cot. Thump. Thump, the vet, checking her chart, looked up. Well, I'll be damned. Elias pressed his forehead to hers, tears silently slipping down his cheeks. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Her eyes fluttered open for just a moment. She saw him, and in that single glance, he knew she wasn't giving up. Not now. Not ever. Weeks later, the clinic visits were fewer, the scars fading. Shadow walked beside him, again slower, but proud. Her steps were steady. Her eyes brighter. Elias, once the ghost who kept to the woods, now stood before a circle of volunteers. At the local animal shelter, speaking softly, awkwardly. He didn't tell them everything, just enough about the swamp, the cries. The moment he pulled her free, I don't know if I saved her, he said, voice rough, or if she saved me first. He showed them the before and after photos. Shadow's first days, muddy, broken, silent. And now alert, calm, her head resting against his knee. People listened. They asked questions. Some cried. Elias never imagined being the one who could offer hope, but with Shadow by his side, he finally understood he wasn't just telling her story, he was rewriting his own. They called him the quiet one, the man who lived in the woods with the war in his eyes and a German shepherd at his heel. But the whispers weren't cruel. They were curious, respectful. Children would watch as Shadow gently approached them, sniffed their hands, then sat like a sentinel, always returning to Elias's side, at the farmer's market, at the hardware store. Even at the library, he was never alone anymore. Some would say she followed him everywhere. Others knew better. They moved through life together, not as man and dog, but as two halves of a whole. Snow fell overnight, blanketing the woods in white. Elias opened the cabin door and stepped onto the porch. Coffee steaming in his mug. Shadow darted into the clearing, her paws kicking up flurries, her bark echoing like laughter through the trees. She rolled in the snow, chased her own tail, looked back at him, eyes bright with mischief. He chuckled, shaking his head, then he laughed, really laughed, the kind of sound that hadn't left his throat in years. Not since before the silence, before the guilt, before the loss. Shadow trotted back, leaped up onto the porch, and nudged her nose into his palm. Elias knelt, resting his forehead against hers. I didn't know I still had that in me, he whispered. She licked his cheek, and together they stood in the quiet snowfall. Two survivors, not just of what had been, but of who they had once been. Elias had gone into that swamp thinking he was just a man walking through silence, his own kind of exile. But what he brought out wasn't just a dog. It was a second chance. For years, he'd built walls around himself so thick, even the echo of laughter had no room inside. He kept people at a distance. Keep the world out. But the moment he looked into her eyes, half buried, half dying, something flickered awake in him. He didn't know it then, but in pulling Shadow from the mud, he was pulling himself out, too, not just from the swamp, but from a deeper darkness he'd lived in for far too long. They hadn't come together the whole time. Elias, with a past he couldn't shake. Shadow, with wounds no one could see. But in the quiet of the woods, in the slow days of recovery and trust, something shifted. They didn't fix each other. They accepted each other. And somehow, in that quiet acceptance, in the unspoken understanding, between man and dog, They became something neither had been in years, steady, unafraid. The things that once broke them didn't disappear, but they no longer held power, because pain shared is pain softened, and together they'd take the broken pieces and build something solid. There were days Elias still woke in a cold sweat, nights when Shadow still growled in her sleep. But those moments didn't define them anymore. They learned to listen to silence, to rest beside each other without needing to speak. A look, a soft nudge, a paw resting on a boot that was enough. Shadow didn't need him to explain the war in his heart, and Elias never asked about hers. They simply stayed, and in the meantime they healed. Elias stood once more at the edge of the swamp, the same place where a cry in the rain had changed everything. Shadow sat beside him, alert but calm, her ears flicking at the breeze. He looked out over the murky water, not with fear, but with gratitude, because it was here that hope had found him again. Not loud, not dramatic, just a heartbeat beside his own. And in that stillness, Elias smiled. For years, he whispered, I thought I was lost. He reached down, fingers brushing the top of her head. But maybe I was just waiting for you.